Welcome to the Velvet Room. Welcome to my cat. Okay, so Persona 4 or Shin Megami Tensei Persona 4 is one of my favorite games of all time. So when it was announced that there will be another one, I was pretty hyped. And after I finished it, or while I was playing it, I was quite disappointed. And this has mainly to do with the story, so this is going to be a video about what's wrong with the story. So when I say the reason why I was disappointed was the story, it means that this is not a bad game per se, because it has good things about it. I would say all of the gameplay aspects are improvements, especially the dungeons. The dungeons are really neat. They are very well designed and they are fun to play, especially when you consider that in the previous games the dungeons were just randomly generated. So that's good. And I wouldn't necessarily say that games need to have, let's say, a great story. They can get away with a mediocre one if it's fun to play them. In case of Persona though, the story was kind of important in that sense that you weren't able to avoid it. So if you're not able to go to get into the story, it's hard to get through. In 4 you had to click through 2 hours of story before you even got to play anything, and I think in P5 it's about the same. In case you need a reminder of what Persona 5 was all about, here's the gist of it. So, a group of Japanese teenagers find out that they have superpowers, and with the help of an ambivalent gendered cat, they use those superpowers to jump into people's hearts and get the evilness out of them. Basically. There's actually more that happens, but for the sake of this review, this is enough. That also means that it will be lightly spoiled. I would consider it still light spoilers. I will not go into the twisty bits at the end and the ending itself, but yeah, there will be kind of spoilers then for P5 and P4. Also, I have played it when it came out, never since. I was pretty clear from the start what I didn't like about it, so that should not be a problem. But if I get anything wrong, if there's anything that slipped my mind, that's the reason probably. Also, I try to not mention Persona 4 so much because I don't want to make it sound like I wanted this game to be a copy of Persona 4, because I didn't. I wanted this game to succeed on its own. Just in my opinion it failed. So, without further ado, let's go into it, okay? So I said that games can get away with a mediocre story in the game if the gameplay is fun, most of the time. And I would go even further to say that I think the villains of a story aren't that important. At least to me they're not that important, especially in a game. Because in those kinds of stories, they usually just play a big role at the end of a story. So if the main villain is not that complex, or if he doesn't make so much sense, let's just say protagonists and stories are more important. Now in Persona 5, it's a little different, because the villains of the story are so much the focal point that it is kind of a big deal that they are all just evil cartoon characters. Because their scenes are mostly there to convey how evil they are. Culminating in a scene where the big guy, whose name I forgot, is just in his office monologuing to himself about 15 minutes how fun it is to be that evil. So it's kind of jarring because they're so one-dimensional, you don't really care about them, and this is a problem if you're going into their dungeons that are like consisting of their emotional state when you don't really care about them. So in P4 this wasn't a problem because there the protagonists were in that dungeon, their shadows and their real selves, so you had to save them by going into that dungeon. And because they were fully fledged characters, you cared about them. So by going into a villain's dungeon who you don't really care about, it's hard to be engaged while you are fighting in that dungeon to convert him. And I don't mean the dungeons were not fun. As previously stated earlier, that I think the dungeons were the best thing about the game. I mean that in a story sense. Because the story, while you are in that dungeon, is not really affecting you. This could have been avoided if they had just thrown in some real-life people that you could save, like for example members of your group, so that you would actually care about progressing the stories while you are fighting in the dungeon. If I remember correctly, there are hints about the reasoning why those people are so evil, but since they never talk about it or they never show any reaction to it or how they got affected by it, it's not really there. There's also the problem of them being just instantly healed from their evilness, but I will get to that. So the villains are not good, and that's a problem here. But what is a more pressing problem is that the protagonists are also not good. So there is this fanboy of the Phantom Thieves of Heart, which would be a great name for a hair metal band. And because he's such a fanboy, he creates a fan page for them, which you can visit and you can engage and you can become a fan. And this webpage is in a sense a whole protagonist. I mean, if you played the game, you know, but if you didn't, it's really hard to convey how much of a role this fucking website plays. Because there's hardly any scene where this fan page doesn't go unmentioned by the group, and every decision that they make is in service of how it would affect their status on that page. They honestly choose their victim just based how big this name is and how much fans his destroyer may get them. And this is their whole reasoning for choosing that guy to take on. Their fame horse is what I want to say. And this is actually baffling because it screams character flaw to me, and I was certain that this would be something that would later be resolved and that they would learn from it, and they would maybe learn that likes are not a good motivation for fighting bad guys, especially if you consider that there is just a small but a chance that they might accidentally kill the people that they jump into. So taking that risk for your own egotistical benefit, for your own fame, even if the outcome is generally beneficial to everyone, is still a dick move. Later in the game, when they think they actually killed someone accidentally with their actions, they start to think about that, but hey, then they learn it was the bad guys that actually killed the man and not them, and everything's fine. You don't have to think about it, and nothing was learned. Hooray. So this makes it really strange, the fact that it wasn't really framed as a character flaw just makes me ask why it was there then. Did the producers think that young teenagers nowadays are like that? That would be sad. You are not like that, are you? I would lose my faith in humanity. And I want to make sure that this is a problem of the group dynamic as a whole and the way they act as the heroes of the story, not very much the individuals. Although I kind of really care about two of them, I think that pretty much comes down to personal preference, but I still want to mention it.